In this lesson, we're going to see how to implement a WebSocket client in an HTML page. It'll talk to a WebSocket server that I've already written, implemented using Node.js. So if you don't already have the Node.js platform installed on your machine, all you need to do is to run this MSI file from the project files folder, and it'll install Node.js in your program files folder on Windows. And then to actually start the server running, if you open up a command window and type this in, so it'll run the Node.js engine and it'll start socket server ws.js. That's the name of my web server that listens on port 8888 for WebSocket connections. So the web server is now listening on port 8888 for WebSocket connections, and we're going to make those connections from this client here. Now, the way I've written the server is that it'll only accept WebSocket connections that are issued from a special domain of localhost. So, for example, if you tried to run the HTML file directly from the file system, the origin that would get sent over to the server would be null, and the server would reject that connection. So I'll illustrate that now. I'll just press enter. So it didn't connect successfully to the web server. The web server rejected the attempt to connect because the origin wasn't localhost. If I go back into the command prompt window, you can see that the web server received the attempted connection from the client. It checked the origin of that request against localhost. It wasn't localhost, it was actually null. That's what happens when you send requests from a file via the file system. So to run the client correctly, I'm going to close this window and I'm going to run it through my localhost server. Like so. So this will send, as soon as the web page starts, a connection request to the server to say, I am localhost, can we have a WebSocket communication? The web server will accept that request, and the client and the server can then communicate asynchronously at the same time. So I'll press enter. So the client has now connected to the server, and the server, as we can see here, accepted the request from localhost, and the server is sending back every second a message to the client. Also, the client can send information back to the server. So I can type in here, Prynhawn da. That means good afternoon in Welsh. It's about 5 PM here on a beautiful spring afternoon in South Wales. So good afternoon, I'll send that to the server. The server receives that message and bounces back a similar response. So here's the message that the server received, Prynhawn da, and it sent back a response to the client, which we can see if I scroll down a bit further. There we go. So that's the message that the client sent to the server. And this is the response message that the server sent back to the client. If I close the client, the server realizes the connection is closed and it outputs a message there. So that's how the example works. Let's see how it's implemented from the client's point of view. So in Komodo Edit, this is the socket client. The good news is that the API in JavaScript for implementing WebSockets is actually quite straightforward. The window object has a WebSocket property, if your browser supports WebSockets, and that object has an API which allows you to send messages to the server and to receive messages that get sent back from the server. I have a patch here if you're running this example under Firefox Mozilla. In Firefox, the property isn't WebSocket. The property you use instead is called Mozilla WebSocket, like so. Okay, so this patch here is just to make sure that the example will work properly if you're using Firefox. Obviously, I was using Chrome, so that isn't exactly relevant in this particular example for me. Right, so when the web page starts up, this is immediate script. This is the URL that I use to connect to the server. The key point here is, well, a few key points. The server is running on localhost on 8888. That was the port number. The protocol that you use for WebSocket communication is WS as opposed to HTTP. So as soon as you make a request to a WS protocol, the web server knows that it's attempting to use the elevated WebSocket protocol as opposed to HTTP. So in HTTP, you have HTTP or HTTPS. For WebSockets, you use WS or WSS if you want to have secure communication. So that's the URL of the server that I'd like to have a WebSocket communication with. What you then do is you create a new WebSocket object using that URL. Okay, so that'll attempt to connect to the web server. Then there are a series of events that you can handle in your client. So the onOpen event will occur when you have a connection that's been opened. I have a log method that I'll show you in a moment, which just simply displays messages on the web page. And we invoke this method to send data to the server. So as well as handling events such as onOpen and onClose and onMessage, you can use this function, send, to send data from the client to the server whenever you want to. So we have an open gateway here. The client can send data to the server whenever it wants, and the server can return data to the client whenever it wants. So this is full duplex, two-way, asynchronous, bidirectional communication offered by AWS. If the server sends data back to the client, then it's handled via the onMessage event. So in that case, this will display messages that are incoming, that have been sent from the server back to the browser. And then when the socket connection is closed, this event occurs. Okay? So let me just scroll down a little further and show you some of these helper functions. So in the web page, we had the opportunity to type in some text like prynhawn da and to send that data to the server. So when the user clicked the send button on the web page, it calls the doSend function. And the doSend function gets the text that you've typed in and then sends it to the server using the send function that I was talking about a few moments ago. And then finally, here we have the log helper function, which just simply displays messages on the panel in the web app. So that's it. That concludes our look at how to implement WebSocket clients using JavaScript and HTML5. So I'll just summarize the key points. In HTML5, the window object has a WebSocket property. So you can create a WebSocket object specifying the URL that you want to connect to, and the URL should use the WS or the WSS protocol. You can handle events that indicate the connection has been opened, or the connection has been closed, or that you received data asynchronously from the server. And if you want to, you can send data back to the server by calling the send function.